Live service is not necessarily a new concept within the gaming realm. In fact, it has been traced back to World of Warcraft and various other MMOs. In recent years, the term has become even more infamous and has gained a generally negative connotation. In this video, I'll be defining what makes a game live service, some examples of games and their live services quality, and in closing, I will analyze the growing stigma around these models of video game business. Without further ado, I present live service games, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So, what is live service? Although the term has been altered throughout the years, nowadays live service can be defined as a model for how a video game is updated during its lifetime. A live service promises but does not guarantee that the game will receive content and quality of life updates free of charge for as long as the developer or publisher desires. Of course, you would still have to pay full price at launch without that content or the promise of it, so technically, some of your money may still be being spent on an invisible season pass or whatever you may call it. In the olden days of gaming, albeit it was only a decade ago, most games that were being continually updated would not be free. They would periodically release DLC packs that added new content for paying customers, and if you had simply bought the base game, you would never see this content. Looking back, DLC may have had its own ups and downs as well, but more on that later. Let's look at some fairly recent live service games and what caused their success or their utter failure. But first, let me briefly explain how I have loosely categorized these games. The good is characterized by a game that has received regular content updates at a fast or moderate pace, and or has received updates for a prolonged period of time. The bad is characterized by still having regular content updates, just not having updates as good or as frequently as the good. The ugly is characterized by infrequent updates and or an abysmal content drought. I have attempted to categorize these games fairly and without bias for the most part, but most of the big ones I talk about I have played, and I would like to gauge other games not mentioned here that some of you have played. So if you would like to see a follow-up video, then comment a live service game that you have experience with, and I may include it in a sequel to this video. Alright, let's start with the good, and first up we have Star Wars Battlefront 2, which is one of my most favorite games of all time, so this is probably where my bias will show. But anyway, the game wasn't that bad to begin with, but that didn't stop YouTubers from bashing on it because of its loot box system. But its live service did provide very good updates almost every month, anywhere from just a bug fix to a big content update. Pretty much every month they were getting out really good updates. New maps, modes, heroes, reinforcements were great and were reminiscent of the classic Battlefronts. Unfortunately, the live service was cut short in June 2020, so more resources could be put into Battlefield 2042's production, and no, I haven't gone over it to this day. But Star Wars Battlefront 2 stands to show that public perception on a game can be completely turned around through its live service. Next up, we have No Man's Sky, which I'm sure all of you know was dogged on launch for its false advertisement with its E3 trailer. But the next update turned everything around for the game, adding and expanding the base game's concepts to the max. And it's still getting occasional content updates nearly 7 years after its initial launch. Not bad. Its latest update, named Fractal, is mainly quality of life updates, including a huge overhaul to the VR version of the game. I have personally sunk a good amount of time into this game, and I can confirm that it may not be my favorite, but it's still a solid game all around and is still worth giving a chance in 2023. And finally, for the good, we have Planetside 2, which is included here just because I think it's a cool game. It's recently celebrated its 10-year anniversary and is going to be continually supported throughout 2023. Also, honorable mention for the good is pretty much every MMO that's managed to survive as long as they have, so a salute to them. Moving on to the bad, we have Battlefield 2042, which was made by the same developer as Star Wars Battlefront 2, but was worse off at the launch of the game. It was also accused of false advertisement like No Man's Sky, probably due to a lack of raw gameplay being shown. Clearly, the trailers were just too epic. There is a much slower burn for new content, since Season 1 did not come out till 7 months after launch, but from launch until then there was some serious bug fixing being done. Since then we have gotten a few, but not many, new maps, modes, and gadgets along with reworks of the release maps. In my opinion, Season 3 solidified Battlefield 2042 with its class system. It made the way you play the game feel completely different from launch, since previously specialists could be equipped with any gadgets. Season 4 is the most recent update and feels completely different from launch. I recommend getting the game if you're interested, especially since it's almost always on sale anyway. And Season 5 and possibly beyond is confirmed, so who knows if the future of Battlefield 2042 will last longer than expected. Sea of Thieves. Oh boy, this is a big one. It was dogged on launch for a lack of content, albeit it wasn't unjustified. The first year of its live service was very promising. There were major updates every few months, with smaller updates every month in between. First, the Hungering Deep introduced a new boss fight in the form of a Megalodon. Second, the Cursed Sails brought a new PvE gauntlet with ships captained by skeletons. Then, Forsaken Shores added the first and last new area to the map. The Devil's Roar is a harsh environment with high risk and reward. Items from this area are worth more, but volcanoes have the chance to erupt and damage your ship. Honestly, I wish the game got new areas added to it more often, but like I said, this was the first and last new area to be added. All of these led up to the epic anniversary update, introduced 2 new trading companies, one of which has since shut down, RIP the Arena, you will not be missed, as well as a 9-part storyline that you can take part in. After the first year, an anniversary update just hasn't felt as exciting since. In my opinion, the Pirates of the Caribbean crossover was the last great Sea of Thieves update has ever seen. Since then, Sea of Thieves has been trying to copy other games' live service approach, and each update has gone gradually less in substance and more in paid cosmetics. The updates have become gradually less creative, and of course they had to add battle passes, which is probably the worst thing you can do to your game right now. I'm not sure exactly what the reason for these terrible updates are these days, but perhaps it's staff changes. Season 9, which will come out the day before this video looks to be nothing of note. If any of you played and remembered, this update looks to be similar to Shrouded Spoils, which was essentially a quality of life update that added new loot, new things to do, and a weather effect, fog. It was much needed, but its overall impact content-wise was minute, not the best way for Sea of Thieves going into their 5th year. Honorable mention for the bad is just in general most midware games that have tried to replicate this live service formula. Now, and finally, onto the ugly. And what better game to be as an example than Halo Infinite? I want to point this out real quick. Its Battle Pass and its progression system are essentially hand in hand. There's no progression outside of the Battle Pass, and that in itself is enough to pull me away from this game. Just want to throw that out there. And basically, the game had no content for a year, because Season 2 went on from March 2022 to March 2023, with the exception of the winter update in between. Also, Forge was a promising aspect of the game, but in my opinion it came too late to really save itself. Because of all this, the Halo community has gone from being in harmony at the launch of the game to now being in shambles. 343 has been criticized plenty throughout the past 10 years for bringing Halo to its shallow grave. I'm not saying that there's no hope for Halo or that Halo has been a dead franchise for the past decade, but the future certainly looks bleak for now. There are now calls for the torch to be passed on to a new, more competent developer to continue Halo, if at all. Currently, Halo Infinite faces dwindling player counts, updates less and less often, and rumors of an engine change. not looking too good at the moment. While making this video, Halo Infinite has announced and released its 3rd season. After its reveal, players were hopeful that this would be a turning point for Halo Infinite. I can't say the same. In fact, this is the most pitiful looking update. I mean, seriously, Forge was the biggest thing before this update, and that was months ago. And in the meantime, your live team has been working on 3 maps. Look out, World, 343 is back on their feet. Infinite has also got its first new gun since launch, which is essentially the DMR from Halo Reach. If this is how the flow of content for Infinite is going to be, it's only downward from here. Update after playing Season 3. I like 2 of the 3 maps at least. The DMR isn't a terrible gun, but what is this new armor core? I didn't even know this was added, but it definitely doesn't look like Halo. In fact, it looks more like the nanosuit from Crysis. To summarize Season 3 in one sentence, we waited a whole year for this. Outside of getting Forged in late 2022, this is the first full quote-unquote season that Infinite has gotten since March 2022. It's sad, really, and I don't have too much hope left for Infinite and 343. Then we have Anthem, which I'm sure most of you already know. It was an infamous live service game that was talked about quite a lot back in the day. All you need to know is that it had such an abysmal amount of content on launch that it was never able to fully recover and was shut down just a year after launch. Also, honorable mention for the ugly is every other live service game that was put on the chopping block too soon to reach its full potential. For example, Babylon's Fall and those silly little battle royales that thought they could compete with the likes of Fortnite or Apex Legends. Live services have only seen more and more criticism over the years. I'll list some main arguments being made. Some of these points I've seen made on the internet, and some are my own. 1. Live services are scams. This is mainly due to the fact that developers of a game do not have to produce new content for a game that they have considered to be live service, nor are they held accountable for delays or cancellations of this content. Players who have essentially paid for this content ahead of time by purchasing the game at full price are let down. Number 2. Live services rely too much on microtransactions and their revenue generation. This is very true. Most live service games are free, and most have microtransactions within them. Once again, microtransactions are no new concept, but are generally overutilized in this certain model of business. In my opinion, it isn't a huge letdown, but sometimes I wonder if a game would be better quality if it was full price and paid up front. Number 3. Live services give the developer the excuse to release a game early and unfinished. Also very true and may even fit the first point of being a scam. The bar for games on release has been lowered drastically because of this. Most live service games are not fully realized until they are abandoned, and sometimes even then the game is still left needing more for the price. Perhaps games are now taking much more effort and resources now to create because of the heightened expectations in terms of graphics and gameplay mechanics, and publishers want to get their games out at the same pace as before. Or maybe it's the fact that a new generation is taking control of the video game industry as a whole and are unfamiliar with its creation tools. Or possibly this new generation is more interested in forcing their political beliefs onto the masses that they can't be bothered to make a decent game with a given deadline. But I regress. Number 4. Live services are not built for the long term and are quick cash grabs. I'm very torn on this point. There are many games that could have remained successful if they had just kept updating and thus maintaining relevancy. There are many games that have survived decades of service, while many more in the modern day last months, let alone longer than, let's be generous here, 2 years. Continually updating a game is a chore for the developer and publisher, but ultimately the higher-ups have the authority to shut down if it isn't meeting revenue goals. Number 5. Live service provides lower quality content than if it were paid DLC. I'm not sure if there's any way to confirm or deny this other than interviewing somebody who has worked on one of these games and knows every single direction the game could have taken. Besides, everyone has a different experience depending on what games you've played. This kind of goes hand in hand with the argument over microtransactions though, and boils down to personal preference. Number 6. Live services rely too much on battle passes. This is more of an argument for me, but I'm sure some of you out there will agree. Ever since Fortnite has introduced battle passes to mainstream gaming, there may be no way back. Gone are the days of a linear leveling system where you unlock new gadgets to mess around with. Like I said earlier, Halo Infinite released with no other progression outside of its battle pass and has contributed to its downfall. No longer can you earn in-game currency and unlock what you want. Of course, this mainly pertains to AAA games and hasn't necessarily seeped into indie or midware games as badly, though I don't think it would be a good thing if it did. The massive disdain for live service models seems to grow every time a failed live service is taken down, yet studios seem to be maintaining or even doubling down on the formula. This divide between game creators and players has caused quite the stir, and I'm not sure if anything is going to improve in the next few years. I know of a few games that are coming out soon that are live service, such as Redfall, which looks like a terrible game in my opinion. But when, and if, it gets review bombed, will it be because of core gameplay, or because of a lack of content due to its live service? Only time will tell. Like I implied earlier, I'm not justifying the lack of content on launch, but it certainly is a trend with these kinds of games. But does live service really have a future? Right now, its future seems to be in jeopardy. Less and less people are willing to buy these types of games on launch, and the games tied to the service may forever be remembered unfavorably because of its lackluster service quality. Sometimes developers need to find a different strategy or adapt that strategy to make it better. Perhaps live services will change to better the quality of games in the coming years. We just need a studio that's willing to set these new standards, and who knows when that will happen. I'm sure that if you've been paying attention within the gaming space over the past few years, you've noticed a certain disliking, some may even consider it a hate, for live services as a whole. Many live service games have been criticized for the reasons I previously mentioned, some just and some unjust. Live service can be a hard thing for a development studio to pull off, and sometimes resources have to be reallocated, so they just end up juggling too many things at once. I think I've put together here a fair argument for and against live service games, but I want to see a general consensus. Comment down below what you have to say about live services. I hope you enjoyed this video. This is the first of this type of video I've done. Like if you enjoyed, dislike if you didn't, and consider subscribing for more videos like this, maybe even better. I'll be back in a couple of weeks, don't you worry about me.